give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it?
Hello, my friend.
Hello.
So our last episode, we were talking about mutual aid, and I was thinking, we're in the middle of primary season right now, and primaries are happening all around the U.S. And for those that might be listening from outside the U.S., this is our precursor to our what we call our general election, when the candidates that are going to run under their respective banners get decided. And we just had some pretty big wins. The one that's getting the most buzz right now is Dr. Abdul El-Sayed in Michigan. He just won his primary for U.S. Senate, running under the Democratic ticket. And I was thinking about, we were talking about mutual aid, and we were talking about how communities coming together and creating systems that can support each other separate from the typical governmental umbrellas that really aren't serving anybody right now. And I wonder if the shift in these primaries feels like that to me. I'm pretty cynical about our electoral system anymore, but I like seeing that in primaries, specifically El-Sayed's primary in Michigan, there was something like an ungodly amount of money spent against him. Like 70 million, I think, was spent in total in opposition in support of the candidates opposing him. 30 million of that was AIPAC for Haley Stevens, and he beat her pretty soundly. So I would love to see the money in politics not be such a dead ringer in terms of they spend this much money and then the election outcomes directly go towards where the most money is spent. It would be lovely to see that shift. I'm curious if you've been seeing anything about that and if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I agree with money out of politics completely and totally, right? Because in our political system, in our political system being driven by privatization and not what I would consider the safety net that the government can provide to offer balance if it is not if it's not influenced by funds and money and privatization in the way that we've been experiencing it throughout this administration. And I'm appreciating seeing how people from a diversity of communities are coming together in this moment and saying, we don't want what we have been experiencing legislatively. We want to have some new ideas, or not. We want to have the old ideas that we have been asking for us to be in consideration, because in this moment, the way that we were talking about in regards to mutual aids, there are so many people that have many more needs that are basic needs that are not being met. And so a number of people being impacted by that means that folks are going to come together in the way that they are coming together. And regardless of how much money is being poured into the opposition, people power still does take precedence over money. If we could remove the money out of politics, that would be even better. But it does speak to what goes on when people come together and say enough is enough, regardless of how much money is coming in. We want to see something different because our needs are not being met, and government exists to be able to support our needs being met, especially the way that we quote unquote do democracy in the United States. So that's the way that I'm thinking about it. And the whole conversation about El-Sayed, excuse me, you corrected the way I pronounced the name, and so I'm just going to check in. It's Dr. Abdul El-Sayed. And let's say it properly.
That's what I've heard is the pronunciation. So
okay. And then the conversations about who is influencing the votes, who is influencing the voter polls. And I'm really thinking that people are being driven by the lack of their needs being met more than anything these days. And we're seeing that across the primaries, and people are having a different ideology about the way that our legal system should be run and administered.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about the DSA, which stands for the Democratic Socialists of America, and a lot of talking points talking about equating socialism with communism, which are two different things, and most people don't know what the definitions of those two things are. And I went to the DSA website just to see, like, what are the numbers, because I know we're talking about Dr. El-Sayed's Michigan run, and he ran under the Democratic banner. I don't believe he identifies as a Democratic Socialist. I could be wrong about that. Correct me in the comments if I am. But on his website, it doesn't say anything about him identifying as a DSA candidate. But so far, there have been 91 primaries where DSA attributed candidates, or candidates who were endorsed by the DSA. Maybe they're running under the Democratic ticket because we have a two-party system, but the DSA has endorsed them. So 91 primaries so far, 46 wins out of 91, and there are 71 races still to happen. So that to me is very interesting in terms of the wave. And we always, we're headed towards the midterms, which is, and for those not in this country, we do our presidential, and every 4 years, and every 2 years there are what we call the midterm, the 2 years in between the 4-year presidential runs, we call the midterms. And there's often a wave opposite of what happens in the presidential. So it's classic behavior to have, Trump and his ideologies win in the general and the 4-year on the presidential ticket, and 2 years later they get spanked with the Democrats coming in and taking over. And it happens in the reverse as well. If the Democrats win the presidential, the Republicans can come in and spank them. So that's not unusual. But what I find interesting is this conversation about DSA, conversation about not just Democratic, but Democratic Socialist. And the things that are on the DSA website that I wanted to just say out loud, because I think a lot of people don't really know what the DSA is, and it's being weaponized and demonized by so many people who want to make it the boogeyman. The three main things that I saw were that they are for decrease the influence of money in politics, which you were just speaking to. That is key. I mean, citizens,
there might be some alignment with what the DSA is.
Yeah, I mean, Citizens United was the Supreme Court decision that allowed for corporations to put just unlimited amounts of money into our politics, and it has just run amok since that decision came down. So get money out of politics, empower ordinary people in workplaces and the economy. So very labor focused, working man focused, working class focused. The people that are actually making this country run and move,
always
and
have.
The country would not be able to run without them, to focus on them. And then the third emphasis point was restructure gender and cultural relationships to be more equitable. So I thought that was interesting. I like that phrasing, gender and cultural relationships to be more equitable. I thought that phrasing was really, because we hear about equity, we hear about equality, we hear about the difference between equity and equality, and how racism and, white supremacy is woven into all of that. So I thought that was an interesting statement. Basically what they're
I'm highly aligned with the DSA, and I would prescribe to myself as a socialist 100%, right? And like in the context of of any type of our political discussions. I think I might have said that at the beginning of our conversation with this. And I'm excited to see that socialism is being discussed within I'm going to call it political economy that we have at this point in time. And the reason is, again, because in the way that we've been existing in the United States under capitalistic structures that also support a system of white supremacy and that type of hierarchy, it is not sustainable, especially as the demographics and the geography of the United States is changing. It's just not sustainable. And to your point, worker power, is the power that has helped to continue to build this nation. And workers and the demographic of workers have always looked different. So in this conversation about a return to when America was great and worker power was being developed, you saw that there was a specific hierarchy on who had the resources in the military, in labor, and in our health and social systems, right? Like there was access that was, for one folks, we've talked about this before on our different episodes, and less access and resources for other folks. But the more people from different geographies and economic social statuses have less resources, the more folks are going to be starting to think about privatization being harmful, capitalism being harmful, if there is not equity in our social and cultural relationships. So the ideology that socialism is offering into the political economy in this moment, especially as we're having wars, especially as resources on a global level are shifting because of our administration's method of engaging other people in other countries. Like we know what they're doing in the Strait with Iran and all of those things. And folks are not, the US doesn't hold the same power as it had before to be able to be the same level of aggressive that they've been throughout the ages to hold positions of power and to allow capitalism to manifest itself. Capitalism has been a system that most economists have recognized is going to implode on itself because we're seeing so wide a gap between those who have and those who do not have, and those who do not have is so much larger than those who do have. There was a conversation of the 99, the 1% previously, and now it is definitely a conversation as we're going into these primaries about the many versus the money. I think somebody quoted that before, and the many are saying, we have to stop allowing the money to dictate how our lives go.
Yeah.
And so we're here in this moment.
Yeah. When you were talking about the US and how the US does not enjoy the same, people don't trust the US, don't respect the US, that our behavior specifically in the last decade to 2 decades, but more especially in the last 3 to 5 years,
yes,
has eroded the way the world sees us. And it makes me think of, on a more interpersonal level, it makes me think of a conversation you and I were having before we got on record about a person's behavior being so outrageous and being so continuous in its violence, and that person does not see the reality of what they're putting into the world and how it's being perceived. And I feel like the US is just a larger version of that.
Microcosm of that.
Yeah, the narcissism of the US, and the fact that we will not do a deep dive into what our culpability, what our responsibility in any of the choices that we've made, and the state of the world, and the state of our environment, and the state of this union, and the humans that live within this within the borders of this country, how they suffer, how we and to your point, the economics and everything else, and just that level of, it's not even, I'm trying to find a different way of not saying, using ableist language, but just the complete disconnect with the reality of what that is, yeah. It can be on an interpersonal level, and then it can be on a national level, and it can be just as destructive and just as all encompassing to the people that it touches, for sure.
Yeah, no, the impact is huge, tremendous. And not only like the lack of awareness, but then also the specific effort to amplify the supremacy. I want to say white supremacy in particular for the US, to like amplify it legislatively through actions, like through the redlining that's happening, through the the support of genocide across the world through
immigration, the ICE detention
yeah,
centers, the
all of
concentration
these
camps.
things that are like specific to white supremacy and that goes hand in hand with capitalism, and the amount of harm that the United States is experiencing, not harm, that's not the word, the it's imploding on itself. The United States is like it hurting itself because the divisiveness, because the outcomes that folks are expecting in the way that they have before, where a ton of people are elected into representation and not representing the majority of the people who are in their constituency, causing more divisiveness in communities and opportunities for people to be pointing fingers at each other. All of these things happen when folks are not in the awareness of how our systems and structures don't have that equity or do not allow a larger amount of people to have their needs met. Then that's when we're starting to see all of these tensions and all of this divisiveness and all of the things that don't help us to evolve into what I imagine that most people in the United States would like to evolve into, which is to be able to have your basic. I feel like I'm being just repetitive, to have your basic needs met, and there's so
Basic
many
needs
basic
would be
needs
nice.
that
Yeah.
are not being met.
Yeah.
Basic needs that are just not being met, at enormous rates for people who are pouring into the system. So like labor, who is putting so much effort and energy into continuing to keep our roads paved, all of the folks that work in the different industries that we have that are, folks that are going to work for 40 hours a week and still can't pay their home bills, still can't grocery shop, still can't get to work because gas prices are so high, because the United States is using policies where we're not thinking about how we can be a global community.
Yeah. Yeah, and public transportation is not robust enough to fill in the gaps, when people can't afford to drive their cars to get to work because the gas, it's a multi-leveled issue. And there're just so many. I'm happy. I hope that the primaries that we're seeing and the outcomes that are happening in those primaries are an indicator that not only are the people of the US fed up with what's happening, but they are willing to show up where they have some power, because the power differential is just, we've talked about this in past, episodes where people say, well, my vote doesn't count, so I'm not going to vote. And I'm not a huge proponent. I mean, you and I have had discussions. I don't believe in the electoral system anymore. I believe it's rigged. I believe, not conspiracy theory rigged, but actually rigged, with oh, God bless you. God bless you.
Thank you.
But there is an opportunity for those that can register the vote, that are able to show up to vote, that might actually have an impact on on the people that are in the government representing their constituents, and who can actually enact laws that might help those constituents with meeting basic needs, as you were just talking about. So I don't know, it's hard to be frustrated by the electoral system, and yet it's the only system we've got to try to impact. Well, to try to impact change and try to enact change. And so it's like I don't know, it's the devil you know or the devil you don't. I don't know, but
the lesser of two evils lot. All right, so we are back with our recording. You might be a little bit of different background because technology was doing its technology thing, but we're here to continue our conversation about, socialism. Like, we really are talking about that, and we have some definitions. And because we were referring to the DSA and the primaries, we thought that it would be important to define how the DSA and Democratic Socialists of America are offering this ideology. And so socialism is a definition is shared ownership. Big business and resources belong to the public or the workers, not private owners at all. And you can talk about the fair wealth spread.
Yeah, so this is a definition of socialism, and then we could talk about the DSA and how that connects. But fair wealth spread. So, in we profits and goods are split to reduce big gaps between rich and poor people. So basically, what we were talking about earlier, where there's trying to balance the haves and the people that don't have, and how do you meet those needs and try to balance those inequities. So that was the second one, and then the third one was focus on needs, which we were talking about as well. The economy is run to help people live well rather than to make money for a few. So what did you say? The many versus the money.
Yes. Yeah. And there's been a huge campaign against socialism, especially in the United States, right? Where we know that our politics, our federal government was erected to make sure that those who are citizens of the United States have a measure of having your needs met. So like when we pay the taxes here in the United States, that's supposed to meet all of our services that happen in our communities, our educational system, not so much our healthcare, where it's like the more advanced countries make sure that all of the folks in community have access to healthcare so that they can continue, housing. There's opportunities for people to have housing to house themselves. And under a socialist ideology, the workers and the people are the ones that are offering what those needs are. And then the government is supposed to support making sure that there's kind of like a spread of that wealth. That doesn't mean that people don't have the opportunity to live with the standard or quality of life that they want to live, though that is the campaign that they'll use these examples of failed communism or failed socialism in other places or throughout history. But that was also being juxtaposed against this campaign that privatization and people being able to not have equity balanced by any type of a measure. That is like the kind of campaign that we've been experiencing against a socialist ideology. But in this day and age, when there's more needs that are not being met, people are understanding how that makes more sense to like help us to get to some more equitable ways of existing together.
Yeah, it's so classic of the US and how the campaign, the narrative works in terms of finding the boogeyman and then figuring out how to convince our electorate that this boogeyman is out to get them and they need to do everything they can to avoid it and stamp it out. And it's insane.
I would offer creating the boogeyman rather than finding the boogeyman.
Like okay, yes, creating, absolutely. Thank you for that. Yes. Creating it rather than finding it, because it is a creation. I mean, to look at these definitions, and then the definition that the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, has on their website for their ideology is a vision of a more free, democratic, and humane society. How in the world can you take that ideology and make it the boogeyman? It is gaslighting to the highest order. I feel like that the narrative has convinced us that capitalism, the free market, how many times has any of you heard, well, the free market will decide? That is not working. It's not working for the majority of USians, and it's not working for many people around the globe. So, yeah. And
because the free market supports private corporations like, Citizens United, where you're making a corporation have the same right as a human, and human, autonomy for natural rights, the way that we have talked about, like people have the natural right to inhabit the space that they want to inhabit. But if you have a corporation that has the same rights as a human being, then the corporations with the amount of power to be able to create narratives, to be able to build boogeymans, has more impact on their communities at large. And that's the things that we need to be wary of. And I think a number of people are becoming more aware of those things. And that is why we're seeing the shift in what is happening in our primaries. Not only the trend that you were talking about, like who, wins the administration and the seat, and then during our primary season, that's the backlash. That's when you get to say, well, the policies that that you have given to us the type of legislation, we agree or don't agree with it. And majority
Right.
of the time, if it's harming a large demographic of the population, you will see people in responsiveness to that, which is why people are really frustrated about who's in leadership of the administration right now, Donald Trump, because if Donald Trump and that kind of political ideology is supporting something, people are showing their displeasure with that and voting completely against it. We also were talking about in the race with, what was his name, Hassan, where he was endorsed to the point that I was making. I had to find out the person's like full name. Amir Hassan, yes, who was endorsed by Donald Trump in Michigan also, and that person lost to Thomas J. Smith, who was on the ballot but had dropped out of the race. So you're seeing, you were explaining that, what that looks like as far as like our race relations, that people would rather vote for somebody who is not even on the ballot. I mean,
on the ballot anymore,
but not actually in the race, than to vote for somebody, one, that Donald Trump has endorsed, and two, that has a name that is not traditional to those who are in leadership in the United States.
Right. So Amir Hassan, is he? I don't think I've seen a picture of him, but he is a black identified man.
Yeah.
So with a name like Amir Hassan, so Trump endorsed him. So obviously he's running in the Republican primary, and the person that was running opposite him had dropped off the ballot, had dropped out of the race. And he still lost. Amir Hassan still lost, which to me just speaks to how racist and Islamophobic. I don't know if Amir identifies as a person that follows the Islamic faith, but it's just classic to me that and it also speaks to Trump's ability to get somebody with that kind of name and that kind of background as a black identified man through a primary race when he's going to lose to the person that's not even on the ballot anymore is just kind of hilarious. So, yeah, it is wild. It is wild. Clearly, Republicans they absolutely do not want someone named Amir Hassan on their ticket, which is just, it's classic. But we were talking about the fair market and how that's what we've been programmed to believe, that the fair market is best and it will decide what's right and whatever. I just wanted to put in the caveat that that's only for the people that have access to the fair market.
Exactly.
And so if you're listening to the sound of my voice and you don't have, you don't have anything in or any access to that fair market, if you're working your fingers to the bone, maybe working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet, trying to keep a roof over your head and food on your table, you don't have access to that fair market. So that fair market's not working for you. So let's try something new. How about that?
Well, fair market is a misnomer, because the market is not fair, because you have to have, in the United States in particular, you have to have all of these programs and policies in place to try to create some equity within the market, so that
because the market is not balanced.
Because it's not fair. It's not balanced, especially in the United States.
We wouldn't need a social safety net if the market was fair and balanced. Yeah.
There's not a fair and free market. So this ideology from the Democratic Socialists of America is really wonderful. Like, how do we look at making sure that we are creating a more free, democratic, and humane society that also is in consideration of gender and cultural norms that exist, and how do we create equity amongst those norms, because there's so much inequity that exists in the United States. And we're seeing that in the primaries, people are not satisfied with the way that resources are being shared amongst people who are working really hard and really pouring into our system, our current system. And there's just not an equity in what is being returned. Yeah,
and the idea of Dr. Abdul El-Sayed going to the Senate. So he's running for U.S. Senate. And to have that level of representation in the Senate, to have someone who believes that on all the things that you just said, that the government should be working to help individuals that live within its constituency, But then also, too, he's very much against any of the aid that we're continuing to give to Israel and in funding the genocide, but also just on basic principle, why are we giving millions and millions and millions of dollars to another country when, regardless of what they're doing with it, which is abysmal and horrible and horrific, when we've got so many people in this country that don't have access to food and don't have
sorry, yes, that don't have access to the resources, but then also a ton of people that are also opposing all of the actions that we're taking on a global component,
the war in Iran, all of it, because
the demographic of people in the United States has changed and shifted in such a way that there's a different understanding of those relationships, because you're talking to your family members, across the seas and what they're experiencing, and or you have migrated away from that so that you can have some opportunity in this market that is supposed to exist in the United States that doesn't. And what we're seeing is that our political parties are shifting, because if there's more power that is being developed in the socialists, because both the Republicans and the Democrats are not creating policies that are meeting people's needs. Right. Now you have a kind of political shift in folks' ideologies and what they are willing to be committed to. Because there's a lot of folks that are really unhappy with the Democratic Party as well, that has been in support of genocide, that has been in support of, Citizens United, that has wanted to be supported by private industry in their campaigns. And you're seeing that a majority of the people in the U.S. are very unhappy with that. And so you see that political shift.
So, yes, we have a two-party system, and there are, I was going to say, workarounds. And there are candidates that are running for office that may be running under that banner, but subscribe to an ideology that actually supports the working class, the working power of this country. And there is, I want to emphasize that power, there is power in that. There is power in the people, in the communities that have been told for decades, nay 100 years, that they're powerless. And so I guess if that's our parting salvo, that's what I wanted to end this episode on. There is power in the people.
There's power in the people. There's power in the united front to coming together. And when there's so many people from a whole bunch of different places that are saying the same thing to those that are in leadership, that's when we are able to see the type of shift that we're seeing in our primaries. And I'm happy about that.
Yeah. So get out and vote. Primary season, we're in it. And I don't know if your state has got one coming up. I know I live in Connecticut, and our primary day is coming up this upcoming Tuesday, August 11th. It'll be the day that this episode drops. So anybody in Connecticut, you need to go vote. And there are several of our representatives and that are up for re-election, and we don't want to see them return. So at least I don't. So so please show up. Please show up. Please show up. Do your Googles, find out who's running, what their platform is, and make your voice heard.
Yes. Blessings.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, as you move throughout your day, continue to ask yourself,
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.